entity categories and what their value is to running and IDPs and services in those federations, and specifically about connecting to services in EduGain. Yesterday, we spoke about attributes, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And as I mentioned, most of the bad and the ugly are coming from EduGain, because a lot of the European federations and the universities in those federations have to deal with GDPR, and releasing personal information is considered more difficult for those federations and universities. So the ReFeds team and others have put together these entity categories to help alleviate some of these issues. So we're going to talk about quickly what are entity categories from a technical point, really. We'll go through each of the entity categories that ReFeds support, and if we have time at the end, I don't know if we will, we'll just have a quick look at how they're actually implemented as part of JAGA. There's also some work that IDPs do to actually implement the entity categories. Generally, it's not too difficult. It's really about having the attributes available. So in your attribute resolver, you'll resolve a whole bunch of attributes, and then you'll have to have a specific attribute filter to filter out the attributes that you send if the service provider is saying that they are supporting one of these entity categories or are part of one of these entity categories. Why isn't that not working? Oh, that's my start slide. Silly me. 1.1. So entity categories, this is just a synopsis that I put on the website for this particular chat, but it's just a way to group federation entities. So a federation entity is an IDP or a service provider or an attribute authority, but we pretty much ignore attribute authorities because we don't have many, that share common criteria. And the intent is that all entities in a given entity category are obliged to conform to the characteristics set out in the definitions of that category. So a bit high level, but as we delve into this stuff, we'll get a better understanding of what that actually means. While entity categories have multiple potential uses, initially they've been used to facilitate decisions on releasing defined sets of attributes to services. It's just a way to make it a more formal way of making it easier for identity providers to say, we have better trust in that particular service because they've gone through some sort of process with their federation operator to be entitled to say they're part of that particular entity category. And the details are actually buried within each of the entity categories definitions. The decision by the IDP would instead be based on the category's details in each SP's entity category specification. Categories are also conceived for IDPs to indicate support for these particular groups. So it's a bit of a two-way street. The service provider says, I want to be part of, say, research and education entity category, and they'll go through a process to get that. An IDP will say, I'm going to support research and scholarship or RNS entity category, and they've actually done some work to actually be able to support the release of attributes for services that say they want RNS. So the SP could use this information to tailor discovery or other aspects of their user experience. So I don't know many services that actually do that, but a service could potentially say, when they go provide their discovery mechanism, they'll only show the the identity providers that are supporting the entity categories that they want. That would mean that if my university wasn't appearing on that list, there's something missing, something wrong. I'd have to go back and say, why aren't I able to access that service? Why isn't my university listed there? And it will generally be because the service has said, I'm only going to show the universities that support that particular entity category. Do you guys know anyone doing that? It seems like a smart thing to do. I think there's one that might be, which might be CERN, that has a restricted list. But it does seem like a smart thing to do if you're running your own discovery within your service. Yeah. If everyone was running this, supporting the RNS, then everybody's IDPs would potentially be listed there. But it's something to think about if you're setting up a service that requires a specific set of attributes based on an entity category. There are other couple of reasons that entity categories have been used. One's for hide from discovery. So these are to hide test IDPs so that they don't appear in the IDP lists on the discovery service. And the other one that's around is to specify that my IDP or my service follows the certify or security framework that's been defined. Let's jump out of there. So if I actually go into the REFEDS wiki, we'll probably need to make this a bit easier to read. So this is not the right one, is it? No, that's not the right page I was looking for. Sorry, let me find it. There we go. Entity category home. So this page has been developed by the REFEDS team. It has a lot of high-level useful information. It goes through what categories are in use. It talks about the purpose of entity categories, gives you a bit of introduction and rationale for these entity categories, and provides links to some supporting material and guidance on attribute release. I'll provide this link further in the slides. So I can add this to the slides before I publish them. But as I said, it provides a lot of useful information, which I'm not going to read to you. I'll leave that as a job for you to do yourselves. And as I said, there's a bunch of supporting material for some of the entity categories that are in use at the moment. Let's see. Now, this is where the boring stuff starts. We go into a bit of detail about the REFEDS entity categories. So find a number of entity categories and provide detailed information about the use. In this presentation, we'll investigate the currently available entity categories, the use and actions you need to take to start using and taking advantage of them. So the first one, this is all of them are listed on the REFEDS specifications page. There's links to each of the entity categories details. And yeah, so it was a quick squeeze of that page. So as I said, this is just a list of all the current entity categories, starting with research and scholarship, hide from discovery, anonymous access version 2, pseudonymous version 2, But you can see they are continually being worked on. There's different versions of this stuff, and over time, the version numbers will tend to increase as new thoughts and ideas about how to actually use these ND categories come out. So the first one we'll dive into is the research and scholarship ND category. And as Nicole showed us on Monday, this one's got a reasonably good uptake of services that want to use this particular entity category. Not so good in the number of identity providers that support this entity category. And I was just talking to the fellow down the back, saying he's trying to get RNS currently implemented at his university. So what's actually involved in research and scholarship? Let's have a look at that. And we'll make that a little bit bigger again. So this is the actual definition for research and scholarship. So the overview: research and education federations are invited to use the RNS category with their members to support the release of attributes to services meeting the requirements. So this particular entity category is all about attribute release. So candidates for RNS are service providers that are operated for the purpose of supporting research and scholarship interactions, collaborations, and management, at least in part. So this one is really focused on supporting research services, getting the attributes that they need. I think it was a little bit controversial when it first came out because publishers were sort of banished from the use of this unless they were publishing research information. So it got a bit messy to start with. That's why we have a new version which has a different name to support publishers and commercial service providers. This one's really about supporting research initiatives and research activities. So example service providers may include collaborative tools such as wikis, blogs, projects, grant management tools that require some personal information about the user to work effectively. The entity category should not be used for access to licensed content such as e-journals. So there are other entity categories that will support the e-journal side of things, which have come out subsequently. And here, identity providers may indicate support for service providers in this category to facilitate discovery and improve the user experience at the service provider. So one of the things we're trying to do, as I said yesterday about attribute release, is make sure that when a researcher accesses a service, there's a fairly high chance that it will work for that researcher because the researcher's information has been provided to that service. If the service doesn't get any information about the user, sometimes it will error and fail, which is okay, because that then forces the university to come back and say, well, we need to fix our identity provider to support these services. Or it will try and request that information about the user directly from the user. So if you don't provide an email address, there might be a pop-up that says, please give us your email address as part of the login flow or the first time you visit flow. There are a few out there. I don't think there's as many as there used to be because we now have this ND category and a lot of services are moving to the use of this ND category. Each of these ND categories will have a syntax or a string that actually will be used inside the metadata to represent the use of that particular ND category. And this one is that string there, refeds.org/category/research and scholarship. By asserting a service provider to be a member of the ND category, the registrar, so the registrar is usually your federation operator, will claim that The service provider has applied for membership in the category and complies with the registration criteria. So when a service comes to a Federation operator, such as myself, as the AAF Federation operator, and they say, we want to be part of this crowd of RNS users or our RNS services, we'll go and check that is it a research-based service, and B, it's not a commercial service provider. That's pretty much what we do. And we check that they're actually part of EduGain. And the service provider's application for RNS has been reviewed and approved by the registrar. So that's what I just said. We actually go through a process, and that's about the trust that I was talking about yesterday. We actually gatekeep services into that particular entity category. And in being part of that entity category, the service provider also claims that they will not use the attributes for purposes that fall outside their service definition. So they won't do bad things. They won't give the information to some other service, or they won't collaborate with other services to get more information about the user. And finally, for identity providers, an identifier claims that they will release the appropriate RNS attributes to the service as outlined below. So if any service that says they're RNS and the IDP says they are supporting RNS, then there's a very high chance that attributes should flow correctly between the IDP and the service. Service provider, registrar, entity category. So as a Federation operator, we've got some checks to perform. The service enhances the research and scholarship activity. That's some subset of the user community, so it's a research service for somebody. The service metadata has been submitted to the registrar for publication, so it's part of a Federation, part of EduGain, and meets these following technical requirements, which you can read at your own leisure. So the definition, the research and scholarship definition also defines the types of attributes that should be released. And they are, what have we got here? The shared user identifier, a personal name, an email address, and the optional affiliation for the user. The shared user identifier is persistent, non-reassigned, non-targeted identifier defined to be either of the following: the person principal name, if not reassigned. We talked about some of this stuff yesterday about attributes and their reassignments. What was that in? Or the eduperson principal name plus the target ID if the eduperson principal name is reassigned. For Australian Access Federations, we've tried to ensure that the eduperson principal name is never reassigned or never reused by anybody, which makes this a bit easier for us to implement. But we do supply both anyway. With regards to the personal name, it's either or both of the following: display name, which should include both given name and surname, or separate attributes, given name and surname. And for Australian Federation IDPs, again, we provide all of those attributes, both display name, given name, and surname. People don't even have surnames occasionally, and have given names. It's even more interesting. But we provide whatever the most available information that we have about the user. And email address is defined to be the mail attribute, so whatever the user's email is as defined by the university. And the affiliation is the scoped version of the affiliation attribute. The service provider should limit their data requirements to the bundle, so that should be enough for them to get going. They may negotiate for additional attributes or data as required by the mechanisms that are outside the scope of this affiliation, this specification. So if a service wanted more attributes than just what's in the bundle, then they start to have to do some additional work to actually get those additional attributes. I don't know that there are many of the RNS services that are wanting additional information, because that's where it gets really hard and really messy and really difficult. Yeah. And generally that stuff that they've got, email, display name, and some sort of unique identifier, is enough to get a service going and be useful for researchers. There's a statement about strong support for it. Consciously arrow section 7. So when a researcher, the research service gets approved for RNS, pretty much this chunk of metadata is added to their actual metadata set. And I can actually demonstrate that now quickly by using a little Jagger tool, which I have set up previously. Hopefully will work. Let's see. Oops, that one. Happened here. Log in. Just log me out. Good on you. So this is the Federation tool or registry tool that a lot of federations will be using. And I think Sri Lanka actually uses this tool, or Learn uses this tool to register services and register IDPs. I've set this up and it's not much stuff in there. I have one service. I have one service and one IDP, which is enough to demonstrate stuff. So I'll have a look at that little test service, and it's going to be hard to see, so we'll make it a little bit bigger. Too big. So it looks like this. It's got some metadata, and in this metadata, you can see it's got the ending descriptor stuff. It's got the SSO descriptor. It's got a bunch of certificates. Then it's got some URLs for the various bindings. We've got a single logout binding. We've got consumer bindings, and a bunch of attribute requests. So this is a bit of a want everything type service. And this service is just an attribute reflector type service anyway. But it's got no indication of a need for the research and scholarship ND category. So to add that, all I need to do is edit the service provider, jump in there, and over here we will find a tab called Entity Attributes. And within this particular Jagger instance, I only have one entity attribute defined, which is research and scholarship. All I need to do is tick that little box and go update. And now that service provider has the research and scholarship ND category as part of its metadata. And we can verify that by checking what the metadata looks like. And we can see this new chunk of metadata has been added to the service provider. So it basically says ND attributes, category, and it's got the research and scholarship name in there, and yeah. So your Jagger tool will actually be able to add that piece of metadata to your service provider. And similarly, I can do the same for the IDP, which is in here. and I have the AF virtual home just as an example. I can go and edit that one. Actually, let's have a look at its metadata first. Metadata. Look at that. Let's try that one. Oh, that's not how you do it. Metadata. View. There it is. So in here, it's hasn't got the entity category or the requirement for that. It's just got some the usual stuff, so certificates, some bindings, and some organizational information. We go back and edit that again, edit the provider. There we go. It also has a tab called Entity Attributes. This one, instead of saying research and scholarship, it's got supporting research and scholarship. So there is a subtle difference in the metadata that's added for IDPs as compared to service providers for these particular entity categories. So service providers want it, IDPs support it. We go back to the metadata. There it is. And we can see here we have this attribute added to the metadata for this particular service, IDP. And the real difference is in the wording here. We have http mace.org entity category -support as compared to just entity category. So that's just indicating it supports the entity category rather than wanting to be part of that entity category. Okay. Identity providers have similar sets or a set of requirements. And basically, it's about supporting the attribute release of services that are part of that entity category. And that blob of metadata, which appears, which I showed you how to make it appear on your IDP's metadata chunk. And we have some references at the end of the specification, which are, if you're really interested, you can dive into these things. One that's probably really useful to dive into is the frequently asked questions. And there's a whole bunch of questions that have been asked and hopefully well answered by the person who put this together, which was Nicole. So that's research and scholarship. Any questions about that one? You've obviously got some issues setting it up, but it's your IDP that's having an issue. And if you do have issues, you can use the Slack channel, the APAN Slack channel, to ask questions. We're happy to take questions from organizations as well as federations. So if you're running an IDP and you're having difficulties, it means probably somebody else is having the same difficulties as you are. So if you make it a bit of a public chat in the APAN Slack channels or on the APAN email lists, then somebody will jump in and help you out. And then that will also help others out. Yep. Back to the next one. So that's research and scholarship. What is it? Not? The next one's hide from discovery. I won't go into the details of this, but it's really just another entity category that's added to your metadata blob. And it asks service providers to not show the particular IDP when they list the IDPs that a user can select from to log into that service. Its main function is to support people putting test IDPs into Edugain or into their federation. Unfortunately, Edugain don't have a test Edugain. And a few people want one, but that doesn't seem to want to be happening. So any light at the end of that tunnel?
There's been several attempts to create test environments in the past. We used to have quite a few environments, but the problem most people had was that the problem most people had was that the test environment could never really adequately reflect the live environment. So the current thinking is just test in the live environment and use hide from discovery. Yeah,
because the other problem we have with our test environment is it fills up with junk, and that junk never gets removed unless the federation operator goes and removes it, which we occasionally do. So that's why we have hide from discovery. It's only specific to identity providers. It's very pointless or completely useless adding hide from discovery for a service provider because they're not part of that discovery mechanism. The next one is anonymous access, and we're in version 2 of this one. So anonymous has a similar specification, and you'll find as you go through these specifications all seem to have the same format somehow magically, which makes them a little bit easier to read once you've gone through a few of them. They generally start with an overview. So research and education federations are invited to use the ReFed's anonymous access ND category with their members to support the release of attributes to service providers meeting the requirements described below. I think we've seen that sentence before, which has changed the word anonymous with RNS, and you'll find that that happens for most of these ones that are supporting attribute release. You frequently asked questions thing for the ND category is made available to deployers. Again, there's a whole lot of supporting material behind all of these ND categories. So a candidate for anonymous access ND category are service providers that offer a level of service based on proof of successful authentication. And that's all they want. Somebody successfully authenticated at a university or a research institute. Great, we'll let them in. None of the attributes in this ND category are specifically intended to provide authorization information. So it's just about, if you're part of the uni, away you go. We won't make any other calls about what level of access or anything that's about the information that's been provided. And the other part of this one is that they're signaling that they do not wish to receive any personalized data. This is very important, particularly for the GDPR type services, where if they get data, then they have to have additional processes about how to deal with that data. So they're saying, don't give us anything more. We just want to know, yes, you're a university person, or no, you're not. Or if you don't know, no, you're not. You just want to know that you are. And that's all they want to know. And they'll get scared if you send them more stuff. Identity providers may indicate support. Again, it's a hazard or wants as part of the group and supports the members of that group type approach. And it's about improving the user's experience at the service. So in this one, it's a self-asserted approach. There's, the gatekeeping role of the federation operator is less important. But with the AF, we're still going to be sitting as gatekeepers for this one as well. So we just make sure that the identity provider is capable of responding appropriately. And there's not much to check here because we know that most of the service or all of our IDPs can do this stuff without even having to look. Again, it has a syntax. This one's got the same start, refeds.org/category, and then the name of the category. This one's just anonymous. Semantics, by asserting a service provider to be a member of this ND category, registrar. Again, the Federation operator has a role here just to be the asserter of this stuff. That the service provider has requested assignment of the category and complies with its criteria, and the service provider has requested to be assigned in the anonymous category and has been reviewed by the against the guidelines. So there is a bit of a gatekeeping role, but it's not a big task to do this one. The criteria. So when a service provider registers, normally the service provider's home federation registers the service provider in this ND category. The following checks must be performed. Ensure the service meets the following technical requirements. And this one, the service actually has a display name and a information URL in its metadata in English. And the service provider provides one or more contacts in its metadata. So there are a couple of little things that you need to check. These things for the AF are mandatory. Everyone has to provide a display name for their service, and they have to provide some sort of information URL. So they're fairly simple, fairly low bar to get over to be part of this particular ND category. The attribute bundle, it consists of only the following data elements: the organization and the affiliation. Okay. And here the organization is the shack home organization value. It's not the O value or organization value, it's the shack one. And that's basically the DNS name that the university or research organization's identified as, and the scope affiliation. So they'll get the home organization twice effectively, once in the scope, affiliation, and the shack home organization. None of these attributes are suitable for accurately assigning access through signaling authorization. Signaling authorizations out of scope for this ND category. Performance guidelines, similar. It's the same sort of chunk of metadata that's added to the service provider's metadata, apart from the name of the actual category has changed. And similarly for identity providers, it's we've got the supported, ND category support, and the name of the entity category. And again, there's a bunch of useful information. And this time we've got some guidelines, recommendation, Federation operators, setting access related ND categories. So any questions about anonymous? A fairly simple one. Moving on, we have pseudo-anonymous. We have time, 20 minutes. Same sort of story. Research and Education Federation is invited to use the pseudo-anonymous access category, where their members support the release of attributes to service providers meeting the requirements described below. We'll see that sentence over and over and over. It's got some definitions. It's got a slightly different name, pseudo-anonymous rather than anonymous in its category name, entity category name. Again, the Federation operator is the gatekeeper of this stuff. We'll look at the requirements for a service provider. The service provider has proven and documented needs for pseudo-anonymous information that forms the attribute bundle for this ND category. Service provider is committed to data minimization. So this good practice security, small amount of information, the better, and will not use the attributes for purposes other than as described in the request. So they won't hand off or share this with anyone else, and ensures that the service provider meets the following technical requirements. So they've got display name, they've got an information URL, and this time we need them to provide a privacy URL to say what they're actually doing with the user's data. And again, all these need to be in English. You can have your own language version if you so choose. And a service provider provides one or more contacts in the metadata. Here are the attributes. We've got organization again. We've got the pairwise user identifier, the pseudo-anonymous pairwise identifier, an affiliation, and assurance. Assurance was in there. Should have. So what do we got? So organization, again, it's a shack, home organization value. The pseudo-anonymous pairwise user identifier is defined to be the pairwise ID. So the Australian Access Federation at the moment can't actually have its IDPs support this particular ND category because the pairwise ID is not part of our core set of attributes that we make available. So I think all of them don't generate or have the pairwise ID. We are working this year to change that so that they can have the pairwise ID and can support this ND category. So I expect that you'll see a lot more IDPs in the AF being able to support this particular ND category sometime later this year or into next year. We want the scoped affiliation again and the EduPerson assurance. So I take it that's the EduPerson assurance from the assurance framework, Ms. Nicole? Assurance? That's the, yep. So you need to start supporting the assurance stuff that we spoke about yesterday as well to make this one available. But even just saying that you do assurance with that.
It's also, you have to flag for assurance, right?
This is where it can get a little complicated because in this one, you have to flag your assurance status, but your insurance status can be, we don't do assurance.
Yep.
So you don't necessarily have to do it, but you have to make an active declaration about whether you are or whether you're not.
Yep.
If that makes sense. It's a bit of a...
Yeah, you can just provide that one value and nothing else about the assurance because we haven't done any work, but we're planning to.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit more work to get this one over the line, and in Australia we have to do some of that work, particularly around the pseudo-anonymous pairwise identifier and the assurance stuff. None of the attributes defined above. So again, it's not for authorization, it's just about authentication and having some information about the user. And being that it's got the pairwise identifier, it will be able to know that this person has visited previously. Doesn't know who it is, but it knows that the person's come back a second or third or fourth or fifth time to the same service. Again, same bundle of stuff in your metadata. Only real change is the name of the attribute has changed. So this one now has pseudo-anonymous rather than anonymous or RNS. For identity providers, again, it's about making sure that they can provide the attributes and they have the support for this pseudo-anonymous. So with your IDPs, you'll want them to be able to support lots of these ND categories. But for a service provider, you really only want them supporting one of the set of ND categories around attribute release. Doesn't really make sense to support two or more ND categories. So as the gatekeepers, as Federation operators, you need to be aware that they should only have one ND category at a time. And again, more references, frequently asked questions about this one. Moving on. Personalized. This is where things start to get more difficult, but not overly difficult. But again, it's same starting sentence. Supports the release of attributes to meet the service provider's needs or requirements. Candidates for personalised ND category are service providers that have a proven need to receive a small set of personal identifiable information about the user in order to effectively provide their service to the user or to enable the user to signal their identity to other users within the service. Service must be able to effectively demonstrate this need to their federation registry, normally the service provider's home federation, to demonstrate their compliance with regulatory requirements concerning personal data through a published privacy notice. So there's a bit of more work for IDPs and service providers to make this happen. Again, not used for authorization, just about identity. And again, IDPs support it, service providers are a member of it. Just a slight change in name from anonymous and pseudo-anonymous to personalized. Semantics: by setting this, the member of the ND category claims that the service provider of the ND category complies, and the service provider requests the assigned personalized entity to be reviewed against the guidelines and approved by the Federation Registrar. So the criteria here, when the service provider registers, the Federation Registry must perform at least the following checks. The service provider has proven and documented need for the personal identifiable information. They can't just say, hey, we need it. They need to actually write it down and make it available so we can check that they really, really need it. Service providers committed to data minimization again, and will not use the attributes for nefarious purposes. And ensure the service provider meets the following technical requirements, and very similar to before: a display name, a information URL, and a privacy URL. The service provider provides one or more contacts in their metadata. And as a Federation operator, it's probably useful to have a look at these, not just the URLs, but the actual content of the URLs to make sure that they are compliant with these requirements. The mechanism by which the So here we've got similar sort of stuff: the organization, user identifier, person's name, person's email address, their affiliation, and their assurance. So this looks similar to research and scholarship, and it is. It's like the second version. I think it originally had the name of research and scholarship version 2 or 3 or something, but then got renamed because it was beyond just having the scope of supporting research services. It just now supports any service in the Federation that wants and meets the requirements of this category. So the Samuel Tui staff organization name, again, the Shack Home organization, user identifier. This one's now the subject ID rather than the pairwise ID. And again, the Australian Access Federation, we don't do subject ID yet, but it is coming. It's now, we've actually added it to our core set of attributes in our Federation rules, and that was approved by our board in May this year, but we haven't actually told anyone yet. We start telling people in September, I think, but we make the new set of rules available, and then we give them 12 months to comply. Display name, given name, surname, email address, affiliation in a scoped version, and the assurance stuff, similar to what was in pseudo-anonymous. Not used for authorization. Companion documents discussing the Federation authorization problems suggested can be found at Federation depth. So deployment, just personalized rather than anonymous or pseudo-anonymous. Similarly for IDPs. So that's that one. So certify. The previous ones were all about attribute release, apart from hide from discovery. The others were about how to get IDPs to release attributes, and using the Federation operator as the gatekeeper and a holder of the trust of the Federation, that IDPs trust the Federation operator to do the right thing, and they're getting them to be willing to release a small set of attributes based on the groupings of services, and for the Federation operator again to gatekeep services into those groups to make sure that the services are doing the right thing. So the Federation operator is holding a fairly strong position of trust in the Federation. And that's where you really want to be, having them being the trusted body that everyone can come to and say, you're doing trust. Certify is different, a different ND category. This one's about signaling your intentions to do stuff in a secure way and to implement secure messaging protocols between various entities, using things like the traffic light protocol to indicate how messages are sent between various entities when security stuff happens. There's 2's out there now, or is it still consulting? And all right, so we'll just jump into 2. Go to the picture framework. No more. No more. No more. 1, 2. That's a PDF-y thing. So the Security Incident Response Trust Framework for Federated Identity. Must have taken you guys a long time to come up with that acronym.
It wasn't me.
So this document identifies practices and attributes of organizations that may facilitate their participation in a trust framework called Certify, whose purpose is to enable coordination of security incident responses across federated organizations. It's about message sending and doing it in the right way. This document is intended for use by personnel responsible for the operational security of federated entities, such as IDP, service providers, and attribute authorities, and Federation operators who may facilitate its adoption by their member organizations. This one's got a lot more content in it. I won't delve into a lot of the detail here, but we'll see what we can find. So, introduction: the Trust Federation, which provides Federation services that enable authentication and authorization systems to extend across organizational boundaries, are operated within many nations in support of their research and education sector and others. This capability allows service providers, organizations to extend access rights to their resources to users whose credentials are managed by identity providers, organizations. Thousands of organizations around the world trust research and education federations with the operation of these foundational services, and their number continues to grow. Very motherhoodish. Well, extremely valuable for large-scale collaboration. The characteristics of R&E activities: this approach exposes new vectors for attack on service provider resources. So having all this federation stuff's great, but yeah, there's new holes that open up potentially. Certify is a means to enable a coordinated response to security incidents in a federated context that does not depend on centralized authority or governance structures to assign roles and responsibilities for doing so. Its intent is threefold. It enables communication and coordination in managing Federation security incidents, a reasonable collection of pertinent event data is available for helping collaborating incident responses, and at least minimal security protections are applied to information systems that directly handle federated transactions. All very good. I'm going to skip down a bit. Yep, I remember this one. Okay, so in this particular ND category, it spells out each of the roles that the various participants take. So operational security. So everyone's securely patching their IDPs, keeping them up to date. Processes are used to manage vulnerability in software operated by the organization. Means are implemented to detect and act on possible intrusion. So you've got some intrusion detection stuff happening. User access rights are suspended, modified, or terminated in a timely manner. So you've got some identity management stuff happening that's related to security. Users and service owners, as defined by ITIL, within organizations can be contacted. So there's some contact information required. And a security incident response capability exists. And yeah, there are more stuff about what we got here. Incident response provides security incident response contact information, responds to requests for assistance, notifies security contacts of NDs participating in Certify when a security event occurs. Able and willing to collaborate in the management of security events. Respects the privacy as determined by the organization's policy and legal consoles, and respects the traffic light protocol in disclosing information. And traceability, relevant system generated information, including timestamps and identifiers, blah, blah, blah. So there's a whole bunch of rules that you need to comply with, but it's all self-asserted, I believe. So you say, I do this, and your Federation operator says, great. One day we'll test you. And I believe In Common have a test thing coming up soon.
Yeah, we do regular tests, mostly focused on just checking if the security contact is active. So if we can get a response from the security contact, we kind of are pretty sure that people are doing what they say they are. So that's our focus on the tests at the moment. Some federations do more detailed, actual simulated incidents. In Common does that. We've done that with the FedOps so far, but haven't gone all the way down into all of them because, at the moment, that would be about 4,000 entities. So that would be a lot of work to work with.
So the one that's coming up for In Common, I think it's in the next month or so, our security person within the AAF is actually sitting on the fence and watching that whole process. So we'll be running a similar event once he's understood what it's all about within the AAF. And again, just to verify that folk are doing some of the Certify stuff. We also require that any entity that joins EduGain sign off and self-cert that they're doing Certify, just to make sure that we're a good participant in the global Federation community. It's easier to get this stuff from the start rather than to try and retrofit it. Retrofitting stuff is always painful. Oh, it's morning tea time. So just going to squeeze down here. Blah, blah, blah. How this stuff is signaled is defined in here somewhere. So in here, you've got the same sort of entity category details. There are some subtle differences to this one. This one's actually using a entity category type of assurance certification rather than support or requires a entity category. And here you can support both version 1 and version 2, and I expect version 3 and 4 and so on as they come out, if they do. Yeah, it's just adding a bit more metadata. So you've got to add the ND category stuff, and you've also got to add a security contact to your metadata. If you don't do that and you start publishing information out to Edugain and you don't have a security contact in your metadata, but you're flagging you support certify, then you'll get a notification. I think you even get taken out of the feed. Your IDP will be removed from the feed if you're not complying with the requirements. So make sure you do everything before you start publishing if you're going to support certify. And it's highly recommended that you all do certify, and every one of your entities also does certify. Even if they're not part of Edugain, it's just good to have that ability to be able to contact folk on their security contacts if there's a security incident. So it's morning tea time now, I think. So we're back at 11. We did have a bit of a late start, so I'll smash through the other ones when we get back, and then we'll get into final topic of the day, Federation updates, it's called baseline. Yeah, so back here around 11 o'clock. If you have any questions about that, we'll take them when we get back as well. So it's all fairly simple stuff. You just need to work through the process and read through those documents and make sure that you're doing fine with that stuff. Occasionally, while I've got all these
Well,
and that will reset.
I just did keep them up.
Well done.
Really touched me. And sometimes some reaction stuff on there. Stuff.